Hello, today we're talking about Richard Wilson, who was a really key figure in the early development of British landscape art. And he was very influential on artists such as Constable and Turner.
Today I'm going to explain a little bit about the dramatic look of this painting as well as the artist's technique.
So Richard Wilson was one of the great early British artists, and he was born in 1714 in North Wales. It's Richard Wilson and Thomas Jones, his student, who are the two figures representing Wales in this in the National Gallery. And so he's very significant for this reason. He was one of the founding members of both the Society of Artists and the Royal Academy. So he was really at the centre of that British art world. Both these institutions were created to help training for artists and also to create a space in which they could exhibit at this point in time. So he's both very important in his own right, but he's also very influential on artists that came after him, both Thomas Jones, who was his student, and the artists Constable and Turner. I think it's fair to say that he's not as well known as he should be given his significance in the history of British art. Today we're talking about this painting, The Valley of the Dee with Chester in the distance. It came into the gallery with another work, Holt Bridge on the River Dee, which was painted the following year. Richard Wilson had travelled to Italy. He'd been there from 1750 to 1757, and he'd visited Venice, he'd stayed in Rome for some time, and he'd visited Naples as well. So during this time, had really come to focus on landscape painting through the encouragement of Francesco Zuccarelli. This painting shows his influence of his time in Italy. So we can see the Claudian framing of the image, this sort of UV shape, and also these beautiful Italianate colours. You often see these sort of purpley violet colours coming in as the landscape is sort of touched with the sunshine. England on this side meets Wales on the left-hand side, and the village of Farndon in Cheshire is just over here. And so that's on the right-hand side, and then we've got this large River Dee meandering its way through the scene. And then in the back, we've got this small city of Chester, small at this point in time. And it's been identified as Chester through these two towers that you can see here, one of which is Chester Cathedral, and the other is St John's Church. But Wilson's included lovely picturesque details to also draw us around this scene. So we've also got these two figures over here who are making their way over the hill. And then there's also these small figures who are just cresting the hill in the distance. So he's giving us that sense of rolling hills. And in the back, these pale mountains or hills are Lancashire, thought to be Lancashire. The other work that's in this pair, Holt Bridge on the River Dee, is thought to be painted or sort of placed just about here, so just down the river from the scene that we're looking at. And that's why one of the reasons these two works are considered to be a pair.
According to scientific analysis performed by our scientific team, the pigments that were used in this painting are lead white, Prussian blue. This is particularly interesting because it has a huge tinting power, so you just need like a tiny bit of this. For the reds, we have vermilion, we have red earths, and we have red lakes. The ones that give the pinkish tones to the sky. The yellows are Naples yellow, ochres, and also yellow lakes, which is particular of Richard Wilson. We don't have any green pigment though. It's really remarkable how Richard Wilson managed to create such a wide variety of greens just by mixing the Prussian blue that he was using with the different yellow and red and brown colors. So it's a very narrow palette. I started approaching the painting and looking at it closely, and after doing some cleaning tests, I really noticed that underneath all those layers of degraded varnish and overpaint, there were huge wide drying cracks all over the surface, and especially focus on the left side of the painting. These drying cracks are a technical defect that it's innate to the artist's technique.
Yes, I remember in the 1953 press release when these paintings were first bought for the gallery, it says that there is a sort of quite an intense drying cracks in the foreground, but beyond that it's in excellent condition.
So these drying cracks happen because sometimes when painting in oil, the artist doesn't stick 100% to the fat over lean painting rule, which means that the underlayers are too wet and slow drying and prevent the top layers to properly seat So they retract since they dry faster than what's underneath. At least 1/8 of his whole output exhibit this sort of technical defect. And we can see this more often after he arrives from Italy. And I think it has to do with the fact that his style has changed. He is more freestyle and he's painting everything more loosely, trying to capture a little bit the plein air effect. So he might be rushing or adding extra things to his paints to make them dry faster.
So Richard Wilson isn't the only person that we see having this dry and crack issue.
It is quite particular in British 18th and 19th century works to exhibit dry and cracks. Artists of that time were very experimental. They were all like influenced by the Industrial Revolution, and they were trying new things, adding things into their materials and also varying their methods.
And we even see this in Sir Joshua Reynolds.
Yeah, absolutely. Sir Joshua Reynolds is one of those examples where the dry and cracks are particularly dramatic. We have a painting here in the gallery.
Lord Heathfield of Gibraltar?
Yeah, that exhibit a problem very similar to this.
So what's it like to tackle something like this?
Well, it has been very daunting and very challenging treatment, to be honest, because of the drying cracks that we see here. This technical defect makes the painting quite vulnerable, and also it might be that it happened because Richard Wilson was adding small amounts of resin to the paint to make it dry faster. We needed to be very careful because some of those glazes or final glazes could be also sensitive to some of the solvents that we were using, and it was very difficult to discern which was original and what's not during the entire process because it was so broadly overpainted, and everything that you can see here in the foreground, it was basically in the same color range. You couldn't see initially anything of like all these transitions going on in the sky, and you couldn't appreciate either like the beautiful brush strokes that sometimes
to create the cloud effects,
like how the paint has so much texture. The same with the like foliage in the trees.
Oh yeah, the building up of that texture on the leaves.
Yeah, how he makes the leaves, it's quite beautiful. And yeah, we can also see how some of the use of resin in his paint might be accountable for that, because that allows you to create more volume in the paint.
Get that thickness. So Maria, what's next?
So the painting is almost fully clean. There's still a couple of things to adjust, but the next stage will be the restoration. So that will entail varnishing the painting to isolate whatever paint I put on top during the retouching state. And also the varnishing will make the painting a lot more saturated. It will allow us to see all the nuances in the colors, all the different greens and all the different shapes and details of the foreground. And after that, I will do the retouching, and I will try to push back all this technical defect to knit together all these drying cracks. So basically I will paint those out so we can get like more comprehensive view of the landscape. But it will be also interesting to leave some of them partially exposed so that we can see like this defect as something inherent to his technique.
Yeah, not having to hide it, but also showing some strengths as well as these issues. And we've also been doing some work right into finding other versions of different figures within Richard Wilson's paintings to try and help recreate.
Yeah, I would have to do quite a bit of reconstruction, especially this image of the dog has been partially lost, so I'll have to reconstruct it.
Oh yes, and you found that image from Yale Centre of British Art with this a really similar dog.
Yeah, a very similar dog, so I think I'm going to use that during my reconstruction. I also have been looking at some image of the cattle, so I can reconstruct some of them. Like the head of this one is totally lost, so I will have to put that back. So I will be doing the restoration campaign of this painting, the retouching stage during these following months, and we hope that we can have this painting by the end of the year back in the galleries.